Mercedes' third generation M-Class demonstrates that the big SUV can still be a responsible choice, and a lot more besides. Beautifully made, quietly capable and state-of-the-art in every conceivable way, it's good enough to redefine the way that we look at the luxury 4x4. Think of all the reasons not to like a large luxury SUV 4x4. First, poor performance, huge tax liabilities, wobbly handling. Yet middle-class motorists still love them, patiently sure that perhaps one day the brands involved would bring us something better. Something like this, the third generation Mercedes M-Class. This has long been the world's most popular luxury 4x4, with over 1.2 million examples sold since its original launch back in 1997, paving a path that other plush large SUVs, BMW's X5, Volvo's XC90 and Audi's Q7 would quickly follow and improve upon. Initially that wasn't too difficult, for the first generation version of this car was a bit of an embarrassment, but Mercedes quickly sorted things out with a second generation 2005 model that was much closer in terms of quality to what we expect from the three-pointed star. You still couldn't accord it a class leader though, the car being neither sharp enough on-road or capable enough off it for that. Its successor though, this W166 Mark III model, launched here in the spring of 2012, could be specified to satisfy buyers of either preference, all the while delivering running cost returns impressive enough to leave rivals questioning their Wolfsbruck dirt technique or wondering on the efficiency of their dynamics. In short, it sounds as though Mercedes has finally worked out what an M-Class should be. But does that mean you should buy one? Let's find out. Now, in my experience, sport utility vehicle makers in the luxury segment are apt to get hung up on one or other of those two words. So you get plenty of sport without much utility, as with Porsche's Cayenne or BMW's X5, or utility without much of the sport, Mitsubishi's Shogun or Toyota's Land Cruiser perhaps. In between those two extremes lie vehicles of this kind that are neither one thing nor the other. Range Rover Sport, the Lexus RX, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, the Volkswagen Touareg, and perhaps most notably this car, the Mercedes M-Class. There's nothing wrong with that. Indeed, such a stance can result in an appealing balance of virtues, where the brand gets it right, as with, say, the Range Rover Sport, but can also result in a frankly forgettable confection if standout qualities remain notable by their absence, as with, say, Volkswagen's Touareg. And frankly forgettable is probably where you would have placed this car's predecessor, hence its replacement by this model after just 6 years, 2 years earlier than planned. Now, with this M-Class, all the engineering might of Mercedes has been directed at creating something remarkable. Hence the segment's first four-cylinder diesel, developed with or without hybrid technology. And running costs improvements so astonishing that they enable the range-topping AMG 525 brake horsepower petrol V8 to approach the running cost returns of the previous generation model's 3-litre V6 diesel. Now, I've talked of two extremes here, the 204 brake horsepower ML250 BlueTech diesel model that props up the range, and the fearsome bi-turbo ML63 AMG petrol V8 variant that completes it. In between lies the model I'm driving here, and it's the one that most people will buy, the ML350 BlueTech. It's a diesel, of course. Almost anything that sells in any numbers in this segment is. And it features basically the same 3-litre CDI diesel that was featured in the previous generation M-Class, though in this case that's been massaged up to 258 brake horsepower. It's enough to get you from rest to 62 miles an hour in an agreeably rapid 7.4 seconds. That's a second and a half quicker than the entry-level ML250 model, and onto a maximum speed of 139 miles an hour. For the record, the top ML63 AMG flagship can spirit itself somehow to 62 miles an hour in just 4.8 seconds until it has to be artificially reined in when it gets to a maximum of 155 miles an hour. More important than the figures though is how they're achieved. The direct steer electric steering system does lack a bit of feel, but it certainly makes this car feel very manoeuvrable. And indeed, you can accomplish a 180-degree turn in just 11.8 meters. More important than that, though, is the first thing that you notice about this car once on the move: just how quiet it is. Now, Mercedes has gone to extraordinary lengths to achieve this level of refinement, with things like its magnesium sound deadening front bulkhead. It's very thick. Also, its triple sealed windows and doors, and its pioneering spray-on aerosol-based NVH insulation. It's all worked. There is no other SUV at any price that's quieter than this one. And the whole ambience is perfectly complemented by the lovely 7G-tronic Plus automatic gearbox that slurs elegantly through its 7 ratios. Unless you want to take it in hand and pummel it through the gears by using the pedal shifters that are mounted behind the steering wheel. But this is the kind of thing you might expect from a plush, pricey Mercedes SUV. What might come as more of a surprise is just how effective this third generation M-Class is when it comes to deploying the considerable reserves of power that it has on offer. Now, much of this is down to the clever adaptive damping system that's fitted standard across the range. When you're driving gently or traversing poor surfaces, then the ride it creates will be soft and absorbent. At higher speeds though, or with faster, sharper changes of direction, these setup tautens and you get much more responsive standards of handling. Now, at any time, you've got the option to override all of this cleverness by manually selecting either sport or comfort options. That's the basic recipe. From there on though, you can make your M-Class exactly what you want it to be before it even rolls out of the showroom. If you want a boulevard cruiser, then you'll want to tick the box for the AirMATIC 4-wheel air suspension system that provides magic carpet-like suppleness and variable ride height. If on the other hand you're coming out of something like a BMW X5 and you want a luxury SUV that can defy the laws of physics when you're hurling it through the twisty stuff, then you'll want the Mercedes Active Curve system. Now, it's a roll stabilization system, much like Porsche's PDCC setup, and it works just as well as that system. It enables you to be eerily immune to the violent body roll and scrabbling understeer that would normally affect a car this big and heavy when you're powering it through a really tight turn. Plenty of emphasis then on tarmac prowess. So where does that leave the minority of buyers who on occasion will want it to function fully off the beaten track? Specifying the optional on and off-road system is the answer. Now, this builds upon a standard mechanical setup that already offers quite a promising starting point for the creation of a decently capable off-roader. It features an intelligent 4MATIC four-wheel drive system that has a 45-55% torque split between front and rear axles and builds in a limited slip differential. Now, this also features a clever Diff lock that's able to transfer more or less of the power to the front or the rear as required as the conditions you're driving over change. That's great for farm tracks and slippery roads, but it won't be enough for the gnarlier stuff, where for a start you'll be limited by a ride height of just 202 millimeters for models riding on standard suspension. If you specify the AirMATIC four-wheel air suspension package though, you can raise your M-Class to as high as 255mm, and with the on and off-road package specified, you can raise it to as much as 285mm. That'll be enough to ford water up to 600mm deep. So specified, your M-Class will have an approach angle of 31 degrees, a departure angle of 29 degrees, and a breakover angle, that's on a side slope, of up to 22 degrees. So that you can make the best use of this lofty ride height and not make too much use of the increased underbody protection, the on and off-road package also includes a low-range gearbox and an inter-axle differential lock. Now, so equipped, you'll be able to set your M-Class up to suit both the terrain and your specific requirements via 6 different driving modes: automatic, winter, trailer, sport, off-road 1, that's for light off-road driving work, and off-road 2 for more arduous excursions. Visually, you'd recognise this as an M-Class were you to be at all familiar with this type of Mercedes, but you'd probably agree it to be a rather different one, longer, wider and lower than before, with a more strident, powerful look replacing the previous gentle curves. The front end is dominated by a 3-bar radiator grille with LED daytime running lights set into chrome inserts integrated into the front bumper. From the side, the elongated lines are supposed to emphasise the large wheelbase and the short overhangs of this car. And true enough, it sure does look big, with a characteristic M-Class C-pillar and clever design that sees the glass in the rear hatch seeming to wrap around into that at the side. At the back, there's a neat spoiler fitted to the standard EasyPack powered tailgate that rises to reveal a decently spacious 690-litre boot that's bigger than comparable SUVs like BMW's X5 and Porsche's Cayenne can provide. There's an optional ski hatch for the carriage of longer items, but if that's not enough, then you can of course push forward the 60/40 split folding seat backs to free up as much as 2,010 litres of totally flat fresh air. In case you're wondering, this boot can't be specified to accommodate the kind of occasional third row seating that you get in, say, an Audi Q7. Despite this third generation M-Class model's extra 23mm of length, Mercedes thinks that it should still remain a 5-seater, leaving 7-seat traffic for their larger GL class model. Still, having just one rear seating row in a car this large should mean that backseat occupants will be able to properly stretch out, and by and large, here they can. Pull back one of the wide opening doors and you'll find a cabin that'll certainly feel quite luxurious enough to comfortably transport 2 adults, especially as the rear backrests can be reclined for greater comfort on longer journeys. Now, this bench hasn't been shaped to really comfortably accommodate a middle third seat passenger, but one can relatively comfortably be transported as long as the journey isn't too long. Up front, as you'd expect from a Mercedes, and want for this kind of money, it's all very smart indeed. The atmosphere pitched somewhere between the Art Deco elegance of a Range Rover and the subtle sportiness of a BMW X5. As a driver, you're positioned behind a lovely leather-stitched 4-spoke multifunction wheel with no fewer than 12 different controls for the trip computer, the radio and the telephone. I like the revised positioning of the multifunction indicator stalk, now moved further up the steering column to make it easier to use. Dominating the leather-stitched dash is a colour infotainment screen linked to a metal controller on the centre console, and you can choose to have the whole area trimmed in one of 4 different wood veneer finishes, or ask for aluminium inserts like these if you're not a lumber lover. M-Class pricing sees asking figures in the £45,000 to £50,000 bracket for the 2 diesel models, while you'll need a budget of around £85,000 if you're looking at the ML63 AMG. Now, you'll need to decide whether that represents good value for money, so let me give you some guidance. I'm assuming that potential would-be buyers of this car don't need space for 7. If they did, after all, they'd be looking at Mercedes' larger GL class model with its 3 rows of seats. No need then to bring 7-seat luxury SUVs like Audi's Q7 or Toyota's Land Cruiser V8 into the equation. Premiership footballers fare like Porsche's Cayenne or the Range Rover, meanwhile, tend to operate on a separate, pricier level when it comes to cost and performance, which leaves this car with really only 5 main rivals. Volkswagen's Touareg and Jeep's Grand Cherokee offer value alternatives. Lexus's RX 450h offers an eco choice, while BMW's X5 and the Range Rover Sport are for those unprepared to compromise on their badge work. You'd expect the entry-level ML250 Blue Tech to be pricier than the Jeep or the Volkswagen, and it is by £5,000 to £6,000. Bear in mind though that you get much of that premium back with the higher resale values that this Mercedes would enjoy when the time came to sell it. You might wonder though why the entry-level ML is exactly the same price pretty much as a BMW X5 3-litre D or a Lexus RX 450h with over 50 brake horsepower more. Mercedes' answer is that their car is a much tougher go-anywhere proposition than the Lexus, and it's a lot cheaper to run than the BMW. In any case, if you do want more power in your M-Class, there's only a £3,000 premium to trade up from the ML250 to this ML350 Blue Tech, which with 258 PS has quite enough power to face down not only the X5, but also the most popular version of Range Rover Sport, the 3-litre TD V6. It's been priced almost exactly against that car, but it's around £7,000 more than a Volkswagen Touareg 3-litre TDI 245 PS. At the top of the range, the £85,000 budget needed to secure an ML63 AMG is almost exactly that you'll require for a BMW X5M that's both thirstier and dirtier. True, a supercharged Range Rover Sport 5-litre V8 is much cheaper, but it's also significantly slower and again much pricier to run. So let's assume that you've been through the comparison process, you've had your test drive and you've decided that an M-Class is indeed your kind of car. What exactly can you expect for your money in terms of specification niceties? Well, quite a lot as it happens, the times being long past when everything you really wanted on a Mercedes would cost you extra from the options list. So all M-Class models come with features like 19-inch AMG alloy wheels, tyre pressure monitoring, metallic paint, aluminium roof rails, auto headlamps and wipers, an active park assist system that measures out spaces and guides you into them, rear privacy glass, an AMG body kit, an electrically powered tailgate, sport seats trimmed in artificial Artico leather with power adjustment, a sports steering wheel, the 7G Tronic Plus 7-speed automatic gearbox, Bluetooth compatibility for your mobile phone, satellite navigation, air conditioning, dual zone air conditioning, and you can also expect a hill holder clutch to stop you drifting backwards on uphill junctions. As for the stereo, well, there's a pretty decent Audio 20 system included as standard, but real audiophiles will want to tick the box for the desirable 450 watt 14-speaker Harman Kardon Logic 7 surround sound system with its 9-channel DSP amplifier. Of course, there are plenty of other options boxes to tick. I'd want the larger 93-litre fuel tank for a start. And on this car, I've got the Command Online with Media Interface package that, when stationary, would give me in-car internet access through a suitably enabled mobile phone, along with the opportunity to connect in various portable media devices and give me aux-in, USB and iPod connectivity. Beyond that, it's a question of deciding exactly what kind of car you want your M-Class to be, then selecting an appropriate options pack to suit. If it's likely to function mainly as a luxury saloon, then you might want to find just under £2,000 for the AirMATIC suspension. If on the other hand you're the kind of driver who occasionally likes to push on a bit, then it might be worth finding just over £3,000 for the active curve system with its active anti-roll bars that compensate for body roll through corners. At the other extreme, if you're in the minority of buyers who occasionally like to take are likely to take their M-Class off-road, then it's essential that you find another couple of £1,000s for the on and off-road system. And safety kit, well, this being a Mercedes, you get plenty of that. So of course there's twin front, side and full-length curtain airbags, as well as a driver's knee airbag. And rear seat side airbags can also be specified. The standard tally also runs to the drowsiness detection system Attention Assist, which shows you a little cup of coffee graphic on the dashboard when the electronics decide that you really should stop for a break. There's also the pre-safe crash anticipatory system, which primes all the car systems if it thinks that a crash is inevitable. And there are Neck Pro anti-whiplash head restraints. There's adaptive brake lights that flash in an emergency stop, aided by a brake assist system and a setup that dries the brake discs in wet weather. Should such an impact fail to prevent you from hitting a pedestrian, God forbid, then there's a clever active bonnet system that in the event of such an impact will raise the bonnet slightly to minimise head injuries. Optional safety kit includes an intelligent lighting system able to dip the headlamps for you at night in the face of oncoming traffic, and also to provide you with different lighting modes to suit different driving conditions. And there's an optional driving assistance package, which includes a lane keeping device to keep dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway, and a blind spot assistance package to stop you dangerously pulling out to overtake another car. Now these days we all expect any entirely new model to deliver better fuel returns and lower emissions, but that's becoming increasingly difficult for the world's automakers. On one hand, they've customers demanding more and more equipment, which of course pushes up vehicle weight. On the other, they have governments increasingly demanding ever more stringent adherence to ever tougher emissions regulations. These can very often, as in the case of the new Euro 6 requirements, these can often actually have an adverse effect on fuel returns and CO2 emissions. Now, it's against this background that the Mercedes engineers tasked themselves to produce the world's most efficient large luxury SUV with this M-Class. They like a challenge in Stuttgart, you see. To ensure that this would be the case, the engineers started by creating what they called an energy transparent vehicle, there to meticulously show the flow of energy from fuel tank to wheel. And using this, they zeroed in on every detail, using weight-saving technologies wherever they could, using things like magnesium and aluminium throughout the design. There's also lots of on-demand only use of ancillaries, things like the oil, water, fuel and power steering pumps. And this car also makes more intelligent use of its air conditioning compressor and its alternator. Add to that the sleeker shape in the sector, low rolling resistance tyres and an intelligent start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, when you're stuck in traffic or you're waiting at the lights. And it's not surprising that in this M-Class you've got the most efficient car in its segment. To make doubly sure of this, Mercedes took the almost unprecedented step of fitting a four-cylinder engine to a car of this kind. The Mark II M-Class model's 3-litre CDI V6 being replaced by a 2.1-litre BlueTech 4-cylinder diesel that, thanks to clever two-stage turbocharging, is almost as fast but far more cost-effective to run. So emissions improved from a smoky 240 grams per kilometre to just 165 grams per kilometre, while fuel consumption on the combined cycle improves from under 30 miles to the gallon to over 45 miles to the gallon. Now, to put that into perspective, that's much better than the kind of figures you could expect from many much smaller SUVs, say a 2-litre diesel automatic Ford Kuga, for example. And it's pretty close to the kind of returns that Lexus's RX 450h needs a complicated hybrid petrol-electric drivetrain to achieve. By the way, that's something that Mercedes has also developed for this particular variant. But even in standard form, the ML250 BlueTEC can save you plenty over obvious rivals, thanks to a tax banding of G. That's 3 better than J-branded rivals like the Range Rover Sport 3-litre TDV6. And it all means that with the optional 93-litre fuel tank fitted, this car is capable of going at as much as 950 miles between fill-ups. The improvements wrought to the ML350 BlueTEC variant I'm driving here aren't quite as staggering as that. After all, this model does still have a 3-litre V6 diesel under the bonnet. Still, its combined cycle fuel return of 39.2 miles to the gallon and 189 grams per kilometre of CO2, well, that's unbeaten amongst direct rivals in this segment. And moving to the top of the range ML63 AMG, well, you might not be expecting much here, but actually 23.9 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 276 grams per kilometre of CO2. Well, these are previously unheard of figures for a big petrol V8 luxury SUV with over 500 brake horsepower under the bonnet. So you've got the idea. This is the most frugal and efficient luxury 4x4 of its kind. But it's also the cleanest and the most eco-conscious too, not only because 95% of it can be recycled at the end of its life. Now this is where we come to the BlueTEC bit of the badgework. This injects an aqueous urea solution called AdBlue into the exhaust stream, releasing ammonia. Now this in turn is then able to convert up to 80% of the harmful nitrous oxides that the car would otherwise put out into harmless nitrogen and water. The only downside is that you've got to, at every service, top up the AdBlue tank that you'll find under the luggage compartment. Your dealer will obviously do that for you. What else? Insurance groupings. You're looking at Group 38 for the ML250 BlueTEC and Group 42 for this ML350 BlueTEC diesel model. And maintenance should be affordable thanks to a standard assist service indicator that ensures that you'll only have a garage visit when it's absolutely necessary. And of course, residual values, well, they'll be the strongest in the class. It's time to reassess the Mercedes M-Class. First, what it won't do. Stride across the Gobi desert quite like a Range Rover Sport, or power around Brands Hatch quite like a BMW X5. But that's not a problem. This car, you see, intentionally sets out to offer more of a middle ground between these two extremes, and it's a place in which this third generation model feels far more comfortable. Specify it for off-road use and it'll deliver mud-plugging prowess expert enough for any right-minded user. Tick the box for AirMATIC suspension and it'll ride like a Rolls Royce. Or specify the active curve system and make it corner like a grown-up hot hatch. All these things are possible from an M-Class that shows just how far the modern luxury SUV has come, not least in its eco-friendliness. Mercedes now sets the benchmark for running cost efficiency in this class of car, and it's one that'll cause plenty of head scratching amongst the brand's closest rivals. There are sportier, more dynamic looking models of this kind you could buy, but I'm struggling to think of an all-round better package. Refined, practical and luxurious, this car is at last a benchmark amongst its peers.